What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Griff, and welcome to the Angry Astronaut. Today, I'm going to bring you a For Honor review. Now, let's take a look at For Honor and what exactly it is. It's basically a game that takes place in a fantasy world where Vikings, samurai, and knights are fighting for one large landmass to try and maintain control over the now scarce resources following a worldwide natural disaster. For Honor is at the very core of itself a fighting game. Albeit a fighting game with a new twist on the genre, in general what you're looking at in regards to For Honor is a game that emphasizes skill, reflexes, and situational awareness. So what do you actually get when you purchase For Honor? Well, oddly enough, what you're actually getting is the whole package deal. Not only are you getting a multiplayer competitive PvP game, but you're also getting a game that has a fully fleshed out campaign. Now to start this off, we're going to be taking a look at music, graphics, and sound. The music, while being fairly basic, does a great job at highlighting the action and making what's going on around you feel very intense, and it really has this quality to it that puts you on edge in a very close match when you're doing a 1v1, a 2v2, or any of the game modes. As far as the sound is concerned, the sound is great. The sound of weapons clanging, as well as the voices when doing certain moves, is doing a really good job at immersing you, and it really helps to give that extra oomph when you're doing an attack or an ability. The graphics, they're fairly beautiful, but they're not really anything too special. This game is not a Crysis by far, but the graphical fidelity is very stunning for the game only being 32 gigabytes. But the biggest star in the visuals are the animations themselves. Each and every attack, parry, and character move actually gives the feeling of weightiness, and my hat goes off to their artists and developers. The next topic here is going to be the campaign. Now, each of the factions has their own part to play in the campaign, and over the course of the campaign, it puts you in the shoes of each and every one of the faction heroes. Kinda similar to how Battlefield 1 handled their campaign. This has the added benefit of getting you somewhat familiar with each class before you hop into multiplayer, but it also has the downside of kind of giving the campaign this feeling that it's just a glorified tutorial. At the beginning of each mission, you have the option to choose which difficulty you would like to play on, and it's pretty standard fare. But where the campaign really shines in terms of giving you a challenge is the realistic mode. This mode takes away several HUD elements, meaning you have to actually pay attention to the characters themselves and their animations, and not the HUD, to be able to defend and attack effectively. One of the places that this campaign really shines the most is the fact that the entire campaign is completely co-op, meaning that you get the opportunity to play through the whole thing with your buddies, and it also means that if you're stuck on a certain mission, you can always bring a friend to help you get through it. For Honor surprisingly has a very interesting story that's complemented by some very well done cinematics and story writing, but unfortunately it's let down by essentially what is an average and forgettable experience that's plagued by some spotty voice acting and odd design decisions. What this really boils down to is a stunning experience in terms of the storytelling and cinematics, ultimately being drowned out by gameplay that feels entirely boring. Where most of the issue stems from isn't the actual combat or the mechanics, but rather what I would just call bad level design. Enemies start feeling repetitive, and it feels in most places like it's just tacked on in terms of actual gameplay experience, but in other places it feels oddly like they put a lot of effort into it in the form of hidden items and views and unlocks for your character in multiplayer. In general, the whole of the actual campaign gameplay gives mixed signals when it comes to the amount of effort Ubisoft put into this aspect of the game. That being said, there's plenty of incentive to go through and complete the campaign on higher difficulties because there are several cosmetic items that can only be unlocked through doing the campaign on the harder difficulties, and realistic mode offers a really good challenge in that department. The next topic that we're going to be talking about are the mechanics. For Honor is based on two concepts, the first being real techniques and the second being stage combat. At its very core, it takes these concepts and made what the developers call the art of battle system. Basically, what that means is that it takes the multiple guards and strike zones and breaks it down into 3 zones, top, left, and right. And when you boil the game's mechanics down to the very basics, it is a fighting game. But, like I said earlier, they've innovated in the genre and made a new and very addicting combat experience through this art of battle system. On the surface, the game seems very simple. Attack your opponent in the direction that he's not guarding, but Ubisoft did an incredible job in terms of giving the mechanics a lot of depth that isn't initially noticeable. And to that end, I have to tip my hat to them, but I also have to outright say that whoever was in charge of their tutorial really fell down on the job. There are a ton of mechanics that aren't initially taught to the player, such as parrying, and won't be unless you navigate the menus to find the hidden advanced tutorial. These really should have been rolled into one massive tutorial, and there's no reason that they shouldn't have been. The next topic on the list is multiplayer. Now, this is by far the category where For Honor really shines, and it's also where it's either going to grab your attention for hours on end, or just push you away. At the end of the day, this game is a PvP-focused, skill-based game, meaning you will face people that will make you feel like you're back in middle school getting bullied for your lunch money, but you'll also have times where you completely stomp the guy you're fighting. One of the more interesting things about this game is that there are 2 types of progression when it comes to multiplayer. There are both gear and level progression. In terms of gear, it's more or less horizontal progression instead of vertical. But that being said, there is an aspect of vertical progression here, because when you first get into the game, someone who has gear is going to have a slight advantage over you, but it's not going to be that much. Where they're really going to have the edge is their skill. When I say it's more of a horizontal progression, I say that because each piece of gear is essentially giving you a main stat to focus on, but it's going to come at a detriment to your other stats the character has. When I say that, what I'm basically meaning is that you can get a blade for your weapon that is going to give you more attack, but because it's giving you more attack, it's going to cost you more stamina for every attack. Now, I personally really support this system, because it allows you to really tailor your character to your playstyle. Ubisoft is also supposed to have matchmaking that's supposed to prevent new players with lower gear getting into matches with more experienced players with a lot of gear, but it's kind of hard to gauge whether or not that's actually working right now. On the other topic of level progression, as you play, you earn experience, and as you earn experience, you gain levels. Now, this level system is fairly basic, and as you progress through the levels, you get feats, which are essentially just abilities you can use in the 4v4 game modes. But the other thing that you get from doing this are cosmetic items, and there are a ton to choose from. Currently, the game has 5 game modes: Duel, Brawl, Dominion, Elimination, and Skirmish. Duel and Brawl are essentially round-based elimination, where it's just about your skill. There are no special abilities. Your gear does not apply in here. Everybody is normalized. It literally just comes down to how good you are. Duel is obviously 1 versus 1, but Brawl is 2 versus 2. Both modes are great fun, and I've spent probably about the most time playing Brawls. For the most part, people are really cool in 2v2, but it can certainly be frustrating at times when your teammate loses his 1v1, and then you're stuck in a 2v1, and your opponents gang up on you. Next up is Dominion. This, for the most part, people regard as the flagship mode for Honor. It's essentially a domination game mode. This is where things start to get a little interesting. 4v4, gear, and abilities are enabled. The goal of the game mode is to be the first team to reach 1,000 points. When you do so, the enemy team starts breaking, which means if they die, they don't get to respawn unless they're revived. And if you execute your opponent, they cannot be revived, period. There's also the opportunity for the team that's breaking to attempt to capture points to get the enemy team back under 1,000 points. And if they're successful in doing so, they rally, meaning they can start respawning again. Elimination is basically Brawl, but instead of 2v2, it's 4v4, and both gear and abilities are enabled. This is my personal favorite game mode. It has a much more tense feeling, and it also incorporates more reliance on teamwork and tactics, and it also kind of has this high emphasis on individual skill, because if you fail, that means you are basically putting your team at a disadvantage. And personally, it's amazing to me. I love this type of game mode. And finally, we have Skirmish, which is more of a surprise game mode, because we didn't know about this until the game really was about to launch. It's essentially a 4v4 team deathmatch, and it functions much like Dominion, in that the first team to reach a certain score breaks the other team, leading to them not being able to respawn. This is also a nice break from the chaos of Dominion if you don't really like having mobs in the middle and having to run around and grabbing and capturing points. Overall, each of these game modes is fairly solid, and some classes really shine in certain game modes over others. That being said, one of the most frustrating things about playing in Dominion or other 4v4 game modes is when you're the last person alive and being completely surrounded and bullied into a corner by the other team. The game honestly feels extremely good in the gameplay department. Every hit feels like it really carried some weight, and it's extremely satisfying when you get a flawless victory or when you come back from a loss to win the game. Currently, there are 12 classes split over 3 factions, which is essentially 4 heroes per faction. And each faction has one type of each hero: a vanguard, a heavy, an assassin, and a hybrid. Each has their own unique playstyle and characteristics, but it's fairly safe to say that if you get used to a certain type of hero on one faction, that it won't be too hard to pick up the same type of hero on another faction. Most of the characters are fairly well balanced. Some outliers exist here or there, such as the Valkyrie, which I honestly think is just simply too weak, and the Shugoki, which in my opinion is just a little too strong for what he actually is. The only real downside to this game's multiplayer is that it's peer-to-peer, meaning that if someone disconnects, the game will pause to redistribute the load or migrate hosts. It's certainly annoying, and it can lead to games crashing out every now and again, but that being said, I don't think it's as major of an issue as some people try to make it out to be. Yes, there is the occasional weird lag, and sometimes the migration can get you killed, but in all honesty, it could be a lot worse, and the downsides, I believe, seem to be very overplayed, and for the most part, the game runs smoothly, without too much of a hitch. I can only see the game getting better, and I also wouldn't mind dedicated servers as an alternative, but that being said, lag exists in dedicated servers as well, so really the biggest issue is just going to be when somebody disconnects, and it has to rebalance the load, meaning the game pauses, and it might set you back a second or two. One last thing I forgot to mention is the territory war minigame. Essentially, when you start the game up for the first time, you're going to choose your faction. Keep in mind that your choice of faction doesn't bar you from choosing heroes from the other factions or grouping with friends from another faction. Now, every time you play a game, you get these things called war assets that you can either manually deploy to war zones, or you can let the game evenly deploy them for you. Every few hours, territory is redistributed based on who has the most assets in each territory, and at the end of a campaign, whichever faction controls the most territory gets some sort of reward. So, what's the verdict? Is For Honor worth full price? That really depends on you as a person. If you don't like PvP and you only want to play through the campaign, I don't think I can recommend it, which is very unfortunate because the actual gameplay mechanics are downright amazing. However, if you do enjoy PvP and multiplayer, I have to absolutely give this game my recommendation. It's got solid multiplayer gameplay, and for some reason it has this quality to it that keeps you coming back for more. One of the most compelling properties about this game as well to me is the fact that Ubisoft is going with the same business model as they did with Rainbow Six Siege, where all new content coming is going to be free, so new maps, game modes, and heroes will be available to everyone for free. On top of that, the game is going to be coming out with ranked play in the future. I can only see this game getting better, so it gets a huge thumbs up for me.